She had been declared dead 8 years ago, but on this quiet winter morning, no one on the plane knew anything about that. She sat in seat 140, close to the window, wrapped in a soft gray shawl, looking outside as the aircraft rolled toward the runway. Her face was calm, almost too calm, like someone who had lived through storms she never talked about anymore. Even the flight attendant who passed by felt something unusual about her presence, yet couldn't explain what it was. She just smiled, politely when offered water, and nodded gently when the seatbelt announcement played. The passengers around her were busy with their own worlds. A man beside her typed non-stop on his laptop. 2 teenagers behind her argued about which movie to watch first. An elderly couple across the aisle tried to figure out their phones. No one cared about the quiet woman sitting by the window. Number. One even noticed how she kept her left hand slightly pressed against her chest, almost as if she was calming herself. To them, she was simply another traveler, but inside, her heart carried a truth others could never imagine. 8 years ago, the world believed she had died in an Air Force training accident. Her photo had been placed on a memorial. Her squadron had saluted her empty seat. Even her family had accepted the loss after a long and painful search. The only people who knew the real story were a handful of officers who were sworn never to speak of her again, because whatever had happened that night wasn't supposed to be survivable. Yet she lived, and the call sign she once carried, Falcon, was buried with her on paper. Now she was here, on a commercial flight, hoping to travel quietly. No drama, no attention. She didn't want anyone from her past to recognize her. She didn't want the world to ask why she was alive. She had learned to keep her head down. She had learned that staying invisible was easier than answering questions that still hurt to remember. As the plane lifted into the sky, she closed her eyes. The sound of the engines humming against the cold air felt strangely familiar. Once upon a time, she used to fly faster machines that cut through clouds like blades. But she forced herself not to think about that life. She had promised she would never return to it. Somewhere halfway through the flight, turbulence shook the cabin. Not severe, just enough to wake people up. A few passengers gasped. The teenagers grabbed their armrests. The elderly couple looked at each other nervously, but she didn't move. She kept breathing slowly, her eyes fixed on the wing outside. She understood aircraft behavior better than anyone in that cabin. This wasn't dangerous. It was normal, but what wasn't normal came a few minutes later. A strange clicking noise echoed through the cabin. It wasn't loud, but she heard it clearly. It was the kind of sound only someone with deep aviation experience would notice. She didn't panic, but her expression changed just a little. She leaned closer to the window, listening carefully. A second click followed, then a faint vibration under the floor. She knew that pattern. She had trained for years to recognize. It instantly something on the aircraft was malfunctioning. She took a soft breath and forced herself to stay still. She couldn't react too fast. She couldn't draw attention. But her fingers tightened around the edge of her seat. She whispered under her breath, almost like reflex. Not now, not again. The captain's voice came through the speakers a moment later, calm but with a slight tension that only trained ears could catch. He announced mild system issues and asked passengers to remain seated. Everyone accepted the message without thinking too deeply. Everyone except the woman in 14A. Her breathing grew slower. Her mind automatically started calculating possibilities: altitude, weather, aircraft weight, distance to nearest airport, engine load, and time available. She tried to stop herself. She didn't want to think like a pilot anymore. She didn't want to be Falcon again, but old habits never truly die. Outside the plane, something else was happening. 2 F-22 jets had been dispatched from a nearby base due to an unidentified signal detected from the aircraft. At first, the jets assumed it was a simple technical misread. But when they flew closer, something unusual happened. Their communications panel lit up with a call sign that no longer existed in official records. Falcon. Both pilots froze. That call sign belonged to someone they had saluted during a memorial, someone they believed had died years ago. It wasn't possible. It shouldn't exist. Yet the signal sat there, blinking quietly on their screens, repeating like a whisper carried through the air. Inside the passenger cabin, she felt a sudden chill. She sensed something she hoped she would never sense again, the presence of military jets escorting the aircraft. She could almost feel their movement through the air, the same way a musician feels the vibration of a familiar instrument. She opened her eyes slowly. No one else noticed anything unusual outside. People continued scrolling on their phones, sipping drinks and yawning. But she felt the weight of the past pressing on her shoulders again. 8 years she had been gone. 8 years she had been dead on paper. And now, somehow, the sky had recognized her again. Asterisk. The moment she opened her eyes fully, she felt something she had tried so hard to forget. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shock. It was a strange mix of recognition and sadness, like meeting an old friend you never wanted to see again. She looked outside through the small window, pretending to stretch her neck casually so no one would notice her focus. Behind the white clouds, she caught a fast shadow moving along the aircraft's right side. Her heart slowed down. So they were here. The F-22 jets were flying close, but not close enough for any ordinary passenger to see. Only someone who knew the skies as deeply as she did could recognize the movement, speed, and position of the shadows. She whispered softly to herself, almost as if she was talking to the sky. Why now? She wasn't supposed to be found. She had worked for years to disappear quietly. Even her passport was under a different name, a name simple enough that no one would look twice. But the sky had its own rules. And the call sign that had somehow triggered the jets, the same call sign she once carried with pride, had pulled her out of the shadows whether she wanted it or not. She sat back in her seat and closed her eyes. Again, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The man beside her finally paused his typing and looked at her. "You okay?" he asked politely. She opened her eyes slowly and nodded with a faint smile. "Yes, just a little tired." Her voice was gentle, steady, giving no clue of the storm inside her mind. The man smiled back and returned to his work, unaware that the woman beside him was the reason 2 fighter jets were now keeping watch over their aircraft. The cabin around her was peaceful. A baby cried softly somewhere in the back, and a flight attendant whispered comforting words to the mother. A young boy in the aisle seat on the other side watched a cartoon with his headphones on. The world inside the plane felt normal, quiet, ordinary, but the world outside was anything but normal. In the sky, the 2 F-22 pilots kept looking at their screens with disbelief. They couldn't understand how that call sign Falcon was appearing. Their instruments were new, updated, and regularly tested. A mistake was unlikely. The call sign wasn't just outdated. It was marked as retired because the pilot behind it was confirmed lost. Her squadron had held a ceremony. Her name had been engraved on a plaque, yet the signal kept blinking like a breath from the past. Back inside the cabin, she unknowingly placed her hand over her left wrist, right where her old identification band used to rest during her training years. Even though she didn't wear it anymore, she could almost feel the memory of the cold metal. She tried to remind herself that she wasn't that person anymore. She wasn't Falcon. She wasn't a pilot. She wasn't a military officer. She was just a quiet passenger traveling from one city to another, minding her own life, but her mind kept drifting back. 8 years ago, she had been in the skies almost every day. Her training was strict, intense, and demanding. She was known for her calmness, her focus, and her ability to stay steady under pressure. The sky had been her second home. Some said it was her first. But one terrible night during a mission, everything had gone wrong. A system failure, a miscommunication, A sudden blackout. Too many things went wrong at once. They searched for her. For days, they found nothing. And then, too quickly the world moved on. Her file was closed. Her story became a lesson for new cadets. But she didn't die. She survived in a way no one else could understand. The details were too heavy to share with anyone. Even she didn't like to remember them. That survival changed her. It took away her identity, her career, her future. She walked away from everything and lived quietly among strangers, carrying her past like a silent shadow. Now, for the first time in 8 years, that past was knocking again. A soft chime echoed through the cabin as the captain came back on the speaker. His voice was calm but slightly tense. "We are experiencing communication interference. Everything is under control. Please remain seated. Communication interference." She closed her eyes. That was the polite version of the truth. The cabin didn't need to know the real reason. Her call sign was disrupting the military channel. She took a slow breath and opened her eyes again. This time, she didn't look outside. She stared ahead at the seat in front of her, her expression steady, but serious. She knew what was coming next. The F-22 jets would send a coded request to the captain. The captain would receive instructions to check if any device on board was emitting signals. They would run a scan. They would trace the source. And eventually, they would find her. But the strangest thing was, she didn't feel fear. She didn't feel panic. She only felt something deep, something she had spent years trying to bury. Responsibility. As if the sky was reminding her that she once belonged to it. As if the world she had run from was quietly saying, "We still remember you," and somewhere outside the aircraft, the pilots flying the F-22s were whispering the same thing over their radio channel. "Falcon, if this is really you, please give us a sign." Asterisk, the strange thing was how calm the cabin looked while everything outside the windows had turned into a silent storm. The woman in seat 14A breathed slowly, trying to keep her hands relaxed on her lap. She didn't want anyone to notice the tension hiding behind her quiet face. She didn't want to draw even the smallest bit of attention. Not when she could already sense what the fighter jets were doing outside. She knew the F-22 pilots were circling the commercial aircraft, trying to confirm what their systems were telling them. She knew they were communicating with ground control, asking if the old call sign was some kind of error. She knew they would soon request permission to approach closer, but she pretended not to know anything. A flight attendant walked slowly down the aisle, checking seatbelts, checking faces, checking for nervous passengers. When she reached 14A, she smiled gently. "Everything okay here?" "Yes, thank you," the woman replied softly, giving the same calm smile she always practiced. But the flight attendant paused for half a second, sensing something in her eyes. Something deep, something that didn't match her quiet tone. It was the kind of look soldiers carry long after leaving the battlefield, the kind of silence that hides too many stories. The attendant didn't understand it, but she felt it. Still, she didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and moved on. The woman in 14A looked outside again, this time more carefully. And there it was, just for a heartbeat, a sleek silver shape cutting through a cloud. The F-22, fast, quiet, watching them. She blinked slowly. Those jets weren't here for the aircraft. They were here for her. She whispered inside her mind, "Stay calm. Stay invisible." But something was already changing. A soft beep came from above. The seatbelt sign flicked on again. This time, not for turbulence. The passengers around her didn't know that. They simply obeyed. The captain spoke through the speakers, voice steady but guarded. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received updated instructions from air traffic control. Please stay seated. Everything is under control." Under control. She knew what that meant. The F-22 pilots had asked the captain for a crew identification, sweep a quiet way of checking whether someone on board belonged to the military. It was standard protocol when a strange signal appeared. Not serious enough to scare passengers, but serious enough that the cockpit had already begun to worry. Her breathing grew heavier. For a moment, she pressed her palm against her shawl, reminding herself that she wasn't that person anymore. She wasn't in uniform. She wasn't on duty. She wasn't here to solve anything. But deep inside, she felt the same thing she felt years ago when she flew alone through heavy clouds, that strange pull. The sky calling her again. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sharp vibration under the plane. Not dangerous, just unusual. Enough to make a few passengers gasp. Enough for the man beside her to look up from his laptop. "What was that?" he asked nervously. She inhaled deeply. "It's okay. Just the air pressure shifting," she said gently. Her voice was so calm that even he felt reassured, though he didn't understand how she could sound so confident. He didn't know she could recognize aircraft vibrations the way musicians recognize musical notes. Meanwhile, outside, the F-22 pilots were growing more confused. "Ground control, the signal is still active," one of them said. "We are picking up the call sign again. Falcon, it's repeating." The second pilot hesitated. Falcon's file was closed years ago. This can't be real. But the blinking signal didn't care about their doubts. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Inside the cabin, she felt her chest tighten. She could sense the pattern of the jet's movement. They were about to do a close pass, something only trained eyes could notice. They wanted to see if they could spot anything unusual inside the main aircraft. They wouldn't see her face clearly, but they might recognize something else. A gesture. A reaction. A signal. She leaned back in her seat, forcing her body to stay still. "Don't react," she reminded herself. "Don't let them see anything," but she couldn't fight her instincts. Not entirely. Her eyes drifted toward the window. And in that exact moment, one of the F-22 jets passed by silent. Fast, almost like a ghost cutting through the clouds. The sleek wing reflected sunlight directly into her eyes. It was a small moment. A 1-second flash, but something inside her broke. Her fingers, without thinking, moved in a tiny, familiar motion. A gesture she used to give when flying. The slightest tap near her thumb. The silent signal pilots used when acknowledging each other through cockpit glass. She froze. Why did she do that? It was too small for anyone inside the plane to notice. But outside, pilots were trained to catch even the smallest sign. Sure enough, one of the F-22 pilots spoke suddenly over the radio, his voice shaking just a little. "Ground control, I think someone inside that plane just acknowledged us." There was silence for a moment. "Describe the signal." "Ground control asked." "A Falcon tap," the pilot whispered. Inside the cabin, the woman in 1-4 closed her eyes. She hadn't meant to do it. It was reflex, a memory. A ghost from her old life, but now. The sky knew she was alive. The moment her fingers made that small, unintentional tap, something shifted in the air around her, something invisible yet powerful. The kind of feeling that makes a person realize they have crossed a line they cannot step back from. She kept her eyes closed for a long second, her breath slow and steady, hoping no one had witnessed that reflex. But deep inside, she knew the truth. The skies had seen it, outside. The F-22 pilot who noticed the gesture tightened his grip on the controls. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke into the radio. "That was a Falcon tap. I'm sure of it." The second pilot, flying just behind, whispered, "Falcon is gone. She's been gone for years. It can't be her." "But what if—" "Don't say it," the second pilot cut in quickly, though his voice was not steady either. They flew beside the commercial plane in silence, each carrying the weight of what they had just seen. Inside the cabin, she slowly opened her eyes and stared at her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. For 8 long years, she had trained herself to forget every habit she once had. She walked differently. She spoke differently. She never looked at the sky for too long. She avoided airports with military bases. She kept her head low. She had rebuilt a life built around disappearing. But a single second of memory had betrayed her. She whispered to herself, almost too softly to hear, "Stay calm." Her heart was steady, though. She wasn't afraid. She was only tired, tired of running. Tired of hiding from the world she once belonged to. Tired of being a ghost among the living. The man in the seat beside her noticed the quiet tension on her face. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked gently. She nodded and forced a small smile. "Yes, just a lot on my mind." He didn't push further. There was something respectful in the way he looked away, giving her space. Maybe he sensed she wasn't just dealing with travel stress. Maybe he felt the heaviness she carried. But he didn't ask, and she was grateful for that. Another soft vibration ran through the aircraft, the kind that wasn't dangerous but wasn't ordinary either. A few people looked around nervously. A baby started crying. A flight attendant walked faster than before, trying to keep everyone calm. The woman in 1-4A knew what that vibration meant. The jet escort had changed formation. Whenever the military tightened their pattern, it meant they had found something. Or someone worth focusing on. She swallowed slowly, then glanced out the window again. This time, she didn't see anything. Just clouds. But her instincts told her the jets were close, very close. The captain's voice suddenly filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making some adjustments to our route. There's no cause for concern. Please remain seated." Adjustments. That was the polite wording for what was really happening. The F-22s had requested the plane to shift altitude and direction for safety checks. She leaned back in her seat, trying to keep her breathing normal. Another memory floated into her mind, uninvited, unwanted. A memory of her last night in uniform. She remembered the roar of her jet, the sharp darkness around her, the sudden blackout, the feeling of falling fast. And then nothing but cold silence. When she woke up days later, she wasn't in any official facility. She was far away, alone, injured, hidden. She never understood why or how she survived when everyone else believed she didn't. All she knew was that returning meant facing questions she wasn't ready to answer. A soft announcement interrupted her memory. "Cabin crew, please take your seats." That was unusual. They only said that when expecting sudden movement. The man beside her looked nervous now. "Is everything okay? The plane feels different." She turned toward him slowly. "Everything will be fine," she said quietly, but with a calmness that felt unnatural for a normal passenger. The truth was, she could sense something the others couldn't. The faint hum of the jet engines outside synchronizing with a maneuver formation. The F-22s were preparing for something. Not an emergency, not a threat, but a confirmation. They wanted proof, and she, sitting quietly in 1-4A, was the proof they were searching for. Outside the aircraft, one of the pilots made a decision. "I'm going closer," he said. "You can't," the second pilot warned. "Protocol doesn't allow. This might be the only chance." The first pilot replied, his voice trembling with a strange mix of hope and disbelief. "If Falcon is alive, we need to see." He shifted his jet slightly, aligning its path with the passenger windows. Inside the cabin, she felt it. She didn't need to see the jet to know it was there. She could feel the pressure in the air changing, the same way she once felt another jet flying wing to wing with her. Her fingers curled tightly around her shawl. She knew what was coming. Slowly, she turned her head and looked through the small, square window, and there, so close she could almost touch it through the glass, was an F-22 jet, holding steady beside the larger plane. The pilot inside leaned slightly, trying to get a better view. His visor reflected sunlight, hiding his face. but she could feel his eyes scanning the cabin. Looking for a ghost, she stayed perfectly still, but then something unexpected happened. The F-22 pilot lifted his gloved hand and tapped his thumb once, softly against his fingers. The Falcon tap, the same signal she had given without thinking. A greeting. A recognition. A question. The woman in 14A felt her heartbeat stop for a moment. Someone in the sky still remembered her. Someone still believed she could be alive. And now they were asking her, "Are you really Falcon?" Asterisk. For a long moment, she didn't move. She kept her hands still in her lap, her posture quiet and calm, as if she didn't even see the jet outside the window. But inside her chest, something shook loose, something she had buried so deep she thought it would never rise again. That tap from the F-22 pilot carried a meaning only she understood. It wasn't just a greeting. It wasn't just a question. It was a call from the past she had tried to erase. The Falcon tap meant, "If you are there, show me." Her breath slowly deepened. She stared straight ahead, not turning toward the window again. She knew one small movement could reveal her identity. She knew she shouldn't respond. Everything she had built in the last 8 years, her quiet life, her privacy, her distance from the world she once served, depended on her staying invisible. But the sky outside wasn't patient. It had waited 8 years already. The F-22 pilot held his jet steady, almost glued to the side of the commercial plane. It was a risky maneuver, something they never did unless the situation was extraordinary. He kept staring into the row of windows, trying to find even the smallest sign. Inside the cabin, passengers were too distracted to notice anything. A kid laughed at a cartoon. Someone coughed. Someone else asked a flight attendant for more water. Life went on like nothing unusual was happening, but she felt everything. The pressure in the air, the slight drag change, the soft hum of military engines, all reminders of who she once was. She pressed her fingers into her shawl and forced her breathing to stay normal. But her thoughts were spinning faster than she wanted. They found me. After all these years, they found me. The man beside her glanced again. "Are you sure you're all right? You look a little pale." She smiled gently. "Just thinking about something." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face for a second longer, as if he sensed something deeper, but didn't know what to ask. Another announcement came. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are coordinating with air traffic control for a slight route correction. Please remain calm." She closed her eyes. This was it. The jets had convinced the captain to make a controlled, subtle descent. Not an emergency landing, not a diversion. Just enough to help the military confirm whatever they needed to confirm. A careful test. A quiet search. A silent question hanging in the air. The F-22 pilot outside tried once more. He tapped again, 2 soft taps this time. Not protocol. Not official. Personal. It meant, "Falcon, if you're alive, don't hide." Her throat tightened. Her vision blurred just a little, not from fear, but from something heavier. The weight of finally being recognized. The world had considered her dead for so long that even she sometimes forgot she was alive. A memory flashed in her mind, her old squadron standing in a line, saluting an empty chair after the night she disappeared. She remembered the rain falling around them, the silent grief, the way the flag hung still in the cold air. They had mourned her. They had let her go. And now one of them might be flying right beside her, searching the windows for the ghost they once lost. She whispered to herself, just loud enough for her own ears, "Don't do this, please." Her plea wasn't to the pilot. It was to her own heart, because something inside her was changing quietly, painfully. A part of her wanted to stay hidden forever. But another part, a part she had tried to kill, was waking up again. It was the part that once answered the sky. The plane shook lightly as the F-22s adjusted their formation again. She could feel their presence without looking. One jet angled upward, The other stayed close, hovering like a shadow, and then it happened. The pilot inside the closer jet lifted both hands for a second, performing a small motion trained into every Air Force member during Lost Comms training. It meant, "We know. Please respond." Her heart thumped painfully in her chest. She stared at her lap, fighting herself. If she ignored them, the jets would eventually pull away. They would assume the signal was a glitch or a mistaken reading. She could return to her quiet life. She could disappear again, like she had for 8 long years. But if she answered, even the smallest answer, nothing would ever be the same. Her breath trembled. Her fingers curled. And then something unexpected happened inside her. She felt a calmness she hadn't felt in years. A steady, familiar calm, the kind that only came to her when she was flying, far above the world, trusting her instincts more than anything else. The calmness of Falcon, and without thinking, without planning, without allowing her fear to stop her, her right hand lifted by a fraction, so small no one beside her noticed, and tapped once. Softly. Against her seat. A single tap. The answer pilots gave only when they were truly ready to be seen again. Outside. The F-22 pilot's eyes widened behind his visor. "We have confirmation," he whispered into the radio. Inside the cabin, she exhaled. Slowly, her eyes closing. It was done. She had answered, for the first time in 8 years. Falcon had returned. The moment her fingertip tapped the seat, the world outside shifted in a way the passengers could never feel. The F-22 pilot didn't cheer, didn't gasp, didn't speak for several seconds. He simply stared through his visor at the row of windows, as if trying to connect a memory to the faint movement he had just witnessed. Inside the cockpit, his breathing turned uneven. "Ground control," he said softly, almost afraid of his own words. "Falcon." Falcon just responded. Ground control didn't answer immediately. The frequency fell into a heavy silence, the kind that happens when something unbelievable becomes real. Everyone listening knew the meaning of that response. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a random passenger shifting in their seat. It was a deliberate tap, a sign, a signature, a legend returning from her own disappearance. Inside the cabin, she slowly lowered her hand and pressed both palms gently against her shawl. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She didn't even open her eyes at first. She simply sat there, breathing in and out as if she had just opened a door she had sworn never to touch again. The man beside her glanced sideways. "You sure? You're okay? You look like you're thinking a lot." She offered a small, gentle smile. "I'm all right, just a little tired." He nodded, though his concern didn't fade completely. He didn't know who she was, but something about her calmness under pressure made him feel strangely safe, like she knew things no ordinary person could possibly know. Soft chime came through the cabin, the sound of the cockpit calling the flight attendants. Something had changed. The lead attendant's face tightened subtly as she listened to the captain's quiet voice through her earpiece. Then she looked down the aisle with a new seriousness. She wasn't told the full truth, only that the flight was under military escort and the crew needed to prepare for controlled protocol guidance. It was a phrase cabin staff rarely heard, and it was never used lightly. Passengers began to sense the shift now, even if they couldn't explain it. People straightened in their seats. Conversations paused. Someone looked out the window and said, "Is that another plane next to us?" A few people leaned toward the glass, trying to spot the shadow moving through the clouds. She kept looking straight ahead. She didn't need to see the jets anymore. She could feel them. Outside, the F-22 pilot kept pace with the commercial aircraft, his jet held with perfect precision. His voice steadied as he spoke again. "Ground control, please advise. We need next steps." Ground control finally replied, slow and careful. "Proceed with phase 2. Visual confirmation." The pilot swallowed. Understood. He slowly shifted. His jet closer, still safe, still controlled, but close enough that anyone who knew how to look could see the pilot clearly, inside the cabin. Her heartbeat grew louder in her own ears. She didn't turn her head. She didn't dare. She was afraid that if she looked at that jet, memories she had locked away for years would come flooding back too quickly. But then something happened she didn't expect. Young boy across the aisle pressed his face to the window and gasped, "Wow, there's a small jet flying next to us." "Look," passengers began murmuring. "Is that normal? Why would military jets be out here? Are we in danger?" A flight attendant walked quickly down the aisle, smiling with forced calm. "Everything is fine. Please stay seated." The boy kept staring out the window, amazed. "The pilot is looking over here." Her pulse quickened. That meant the F-22 pilot was now positioned perfectly to see her row. She didn't turn. She couldn't. But she felt the weight of his gaze searching the windows. 8 years ago, pilots used to form up beside her wing, trusting her, learning from her, flying as one. She remembered the silent nods through glass, the tiny gestures that said more than words ever could. She remembered being seen, not as a mystery, not as a ghost, but as someone who belonged to the sky. Now the sky was asking her to show herself. Again, her breath trembled. The pilot outside lifted his hand again, slowly, placing his fingers near the glass of his cockpit. He performed the signal all Air Force pilots used when they wanted to confirm identity without radio, a slow, deliberate two-tap motion. "You are not imagined. You are real. Show me." She closed her eyes. Her heart whispered, "Don't do it." Her past whispered, "You already answered once." Her instincts whispered, "It's time." She finally turned her head, just slightly toward the window. Her face remained calm, but her eyes softened with a quiet vulnerability she hadn't allowed anyone to see in years. And in that single moment, even through tinted cockpit glass, the F-22 pilot saw her eyes. He froze. A shaky breath escaped him. "It's her," he whispered. He didn't shout it. He didn't announce it officially. It came out like someone who had just seen a memory return to life. Inside the cabin, she quickly looked away before anyone noticed. Her fingers clutched her shawl, trembling from the pressure of what she had just done. She had shown herself. Outside, the F-22 pilot steadied his voice for the radio. "Ground control. Visual confirmation established." Ground control responded. "Copy. Begin Phase 3. He swallowed hard. "Phase 3? Yes, we need direct connection with Falcon." He stared at the commercial plane in disbelief. "She's a passenger," he said quietly. "How do we connect with her?" There was a pause. Then ground control replied with a sentence that made his hands shake around the controls. "We let her decide if she wants to come home." Inside the cabin, she felt a sudden tightening in her chest, the kind that only comes when a person realizes the past is no longer chasing them. It is standing right in front of them, waiting for an answer. She sat very still in seat 14A, her hands resting softly on her shawl, as if holding herself together. The cabin around her felt strangely quiet now. People still talked, still shifted in their seats, still watched movies and whispered into their phones, but the atmosphere had changed. A tension hung in the air that only she truly understood. The two F-22 jets hovered in perfect formation, their wings cutting through the cold sky with unbelievable precision. They weren't threatening the aircraft. They weren't forcing anything. They were simply waiting for her. Waiting for the woman the world believed was gone forever, waiting for Falcon. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. But her heart kept reminding her of the truth. She had crossed a line. She had responded to the pilot. She had shown her face. And now the sky wasn't going to let her disappear again. The captain's voice came through the speakers, gentle but carrying a new weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will soon be receiving further instructions from air traffic control. Everything Remain safe. Please stay calm. Passengers looked around with confusion and curiosity. Some pressed their faces to the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of the jets outside. The little boy from earlier waved excitedly at the window, as if greeting the military pilot, but she stayed quiet, still, grounded in her seat, even though inside, she felt like she was floating somewhere far away from the cabin. The man sitting beside her spoke softly. "Do you think something serious is happening?" She paused, then replied with a truth wrapped in calmness. "Sometimes the sky asks questions, that's all." He didn't understand, but he felt he shouldn't ask more. Something about her eyes made him sense that she carried stories no one could easily hold outside. The F-22 pilot who had recognized her was fighting his own emotions. His voice was steady when he spoke to ground control, but his hands trembled slightly on the controls. "She saw me," he whispered. "It's really her." Ground control responded quietly. "Pilot, hold position. Falcon will respond if she chooses." If she chooses, that sentence echoed inside her mind like thunder. For 8 long years, choice was the only thing she held on to. She chose to survive. She chose to stay hidden. She chose silence when the world believed she was gone. She chose a life outside the sky because she didn't trust herself to return. She had lost too much. She had changed too much. She didn't know if she belonged anywhere anymore. But now the sky was offering her something she never expected. The chance to decide again. Her throat tightened. She opened her eyes slowly and looked down the aisle, watching the cabin crew move quietly with practiced calm. She admired them, their professionalism, their kindness, their quiet strength in uncertain situations. They reminded her of her old squadron, people who stayed steady, even when the SkyEmotions single quotes T. announcement came. "Passengers, please. Remain seated as we begin a controlled descent to a lower altitude." Some murmured nervously, others looked relieved. But she knew exactly what this meant. The jets were lowering the aircraft to a communication altitude, a level where a connection could be made if she chose to respond. She swallowed softly. Her life was split into 2 worlds now. The quiet world she built for herself on the ground, and the world of skies and call signs and wing signals waiting above. Which one was she? Her chest rose and fell with a slow breath. Do I answer? Do I stay hidden? Do I leave the sky behind forever? The aircraft steadied again, and outside, the F-22 pilot lifted a small object near his visor. A gesture she recognized instantly. He pressed it gently. Once her old squadron token. He still carried it. Her eyes softened, filling slowly with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't forced. It wasn't painful. It was gentle. Someone had remembered her. Someone had believed in her. Someone had carried her memory all these years, not as a ghost, but as a person who mattered. Her hands trembled as she placed them on her lap, and then, very quietly, she whispered to herself, "I'm still here." She didn't stand. She didn't signal wildly. She didn't draw attention. She simply lifted her hand, just slightly, letting her fingers rest against the window frame as she tapped once, slowly, deliberately. The Falcon tap, a soft acknowledgement. A human answer. A whisper across the sky. Outside, the pilot inhaled sharply. "That's her," he said. "Falcon confirms." Inside the cabin, no one noticed anything unusual. To them, she was just adjusting her seat. Just another passenger. She knew what she had done, and the sky knew. The jets shifted formation gently, respectfully, no pressure, no demands. Just presence. For the first time in 8 years, she didn't feel hunted. She didn't feel like a ghost. She didn't feel alone. She felt seen. She felt understood. She felt free in a way she hadn't expected. The pilot spoke once more, voice steady. "Falcon, welcome back." A tear warmed the corner of her eye, not sadness, not fear, But something like quiet relief. She whispered, so softly no one else could hear. I'm not coming back to the old life. But thank you for finding me. Her answer was enough. The jets slowly pulled away into escort distance, not demanding anything, not forcing her into any path. They were simply there, guiding the plane safely, honoring a pilot who had returned not to the uniform, but to herself. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and breathed with the ease of someone who finally stopped running. And high above the clouds, 2 F-22 pilots flew on in silence, carrying a story the sky would never forget.